I know what a $4 million mistake looks like. I've watched one get made, right across my fence line, in slow motion, over 18 months. And I told them. I told them twice. Stood right there at the corner post with mud on my boots and said exactly what I knew. What this ground had been telling me for 31 years. They smiled. They nodded. One of them wrote something on a tablet. And then they drove their $800,000 Caterpillar 374 excavator right back to the bottom field and kept on digging. My name's Dale Whitmore. I've been farming outside of Ames, Iowa since 1993. 480 acres of corn and soybeans. A little cover crop rotation I started 8 years ago that my neighbors still think is a waste of seed money. I run a John Deere 9RX 640. That's 640 horsepower. 4 rubber tracks, about 65. Zeros a pounds of machine when she's fully ballasted. I know what this ground does. I know what it wants. I know where it hides water and where it moves it, and where it holds it so long it'll swallow a set of 620 tires to the axle if you let it. The field next door, the Gruber tract, 200 acres, sat idle for 2 seasons after old Vernon Gruber passed. His kids were in Des Moines and Minneapolis. They didn't want the land. They wanted what the land was worth. Midwest Agricor, a corporate operation out of Chicago with a processing and storage division, bought the whole parcel in the spring of 2021. Cash deal. Didn't even go to auction. I wasn't worried about that at first. Corporate farms move in. It happens. You learn to live next door to them the same way you learn to live next door to anyone, with the fence between you and your mouth mostly shut. But then I saw where they were planning to put the primary grain elevator complex. If you've ever watched a machine that big move into ground that doesn't want it, stay with me. Because what I'm about to describe took 18 months to fully play out. And every single sign of it was there on day 1, right there in the soil, if you knew how to read it. Subscribe if you've ever been right and still had to watch the wreck happen anyway. I know there are a lot of us out there. Let me take you back to the fall of 1998. I'd only been on this place 5 years. Young, thought I knew things. We had a wet October. Not unusual for central Iowa, but this one came fast and heavy. 11 inches of rain in 19 days. My south field, the 80 acres that borders the old drainage ditch, went under. Not just wet. I'm talking standing water, 2 feet of it, for the better part of 3 weeks. My John Deere 8300 at the time, about 260 horsepower, big for what I had back then, went in to check the tile line outlets and sank to the front axle before I'd gone 40 yards. Had to call Larry Hendricks from 2 miles east to pull me out with his 4WD loader. Took 3 hours, and a set of tow chains rated to 80,000 pounds. Humbling doesn't cover it. What I learned from that, the hard way, is that the southeast quarter of this property sits on what the old-timers around here call a ghost slough. It's not on any official map. It doesn't show up in the county drainage survey from 1987, but it's real. It's a buried wetland, an old prairie pothole that got tiled and farmed over sometime in the 1940s. The tile holds it most years, normal years, but when you get a true wet cycle, the water table rises, and that old pothole wants to come back. The tile can't keep up. The ground turns into something between soil and soup, and anything heavy enough starts going through it instead of over it. I mapped it myself over about 6 years, just walking it, noting where the tile outlets ran slow in October, where the standing corn looked pale in July, a sign of root stress from high water table, where my 9RX left tracks in dry August that didn't make sense, because the topsoil said dry, but something deeper was moving. That ghost slough runs in a rough oval. About 80 acres of it sits on my land. The other half, the deeper, wetter half, runs northeast, right into the Gruber tract, right into the exact corner where Midwest Agricor was planning to pour a concrete foundation for a 2.4 million bushel grain elevator and a connected flat storage building the size of a city block. I knew it the morning their survey crew showed up. Watched them from the cab of my tractor. I was running a field cultivator pass, getting ready for planting, and I could see exactly where they were staking the layout. The lead engineer, a younger guy, maybe 35, drove a white F-250 with an Illinois plate. He was out there with a survey total station and a GPS receiver and a roll of orange flagging, and he was putting stakes right in the middle of the worst ground on that entire parcel. I finished my pass. I parked at the end row. I walked over. He was friendly enough. Name was Marcus. He shook my hand. He asked how long I'd been on the neighboring place. When I told him 31 years, he nodded in a way that was respectful without being interested. There's a difference. I told him about the ghost slough. I told him about 1998. I told him where the tile lines ran and where they didn't, and what the ground did in a wet cycle. I told him the soil survey they'd been given was a standard NRCS map that didn't capture subsurface hydrology at that scale, and that the Haney fine sandy loam designation for that corner was technically correct at the surface and completely misleading below the plow zone. He wrote something in his notebook. He said they'd had a Phase 1 environmental done. He said the geotech firm had run borings on a 200-foot grid. He said the results were clean. I said, "How deep did they go?" He said, 15 feet at most locations. I said, "The problem starts at 18. He smiled. Not a bad smile, just a certain kind of smile. The kind that means I hear you, but I've got a firm and engineers and a schedule, and you're a corn farmer from Iowa." He thanked me for my time. He went back to his flagging. I went back to my tractor. I sat there in the cab for a few minutes with the engine at idle. That 13. 5-liter diesel sitting there, pulling about 480 pound-feet of torque just at low throttle. That particular low growl that I know better than most sounds in my life. And I thought, I have done what I can do. I was wrong about that. I had one more thing to try. 3 weeks later, the project manager came out to introduce herself. Her name was Christine Fales, Regional Development Director for Midwest AgriCorps' Infrastructure Division. She drove a black Suburban and wore boots that were a little too clean for a site visit. She walked the staked perimeter with a hard hat on and a site plan folded under one arm, and on her way back to her vehicle, she came over to the fence to introduce herself to the neighbor. I walked out to meet her. I was as straightforward as I know how to be. I said, "I want to show you something." She had 40 minutes before her next call. She gave me 20 of them. I took her along the fence line to where you can still see, in a wet spring, the topographic signature of the old slough. A subtle bowl in the landscape, maybe a 1.5 feet of relief. Easy to miss if you don't know what you're looking at. I told her what it was. I told her what the tile survey showed. I told her that the county drainage district had a record of a tile abandonment in that corner from 1963, which meant there was a section of old clay tile that wasn't connected to anything, sitting in the ground doing nothing but holding water in the wrong place. She was listening. I'll give her that. She asked a couple of real questions. About tile depth, about seasonal variation in the water table. Then her phone rang. She held up one finger. She turned half away. She talked for 4 minutes. When she turned back, the moment was gone. She said, "Our geotech is very experienced with Iowa soils." She said, "We've built on ground like this before." She said, "Thank you, Dale, genuinely." And she got in the Suburban. That was in April of 2021. They broke ground in June. The main excavation started on a dry week. We'd had a dry May, which is the worst kind of luck for a situation like this, because dry conditions hide everything I was talking about. The Cat 374 came in first. That's a 180,000 lb excavator with a 567 horsepower engine, a 36-inch bucket capable of pulling about 120,000 pounds of breakout force. Watching it work is genuinely something. The reach on that machine is 47 feet. It pulls a cut through Iowa topsoil like a spoon through warm butter. You feel that kind of power through the soles of your boots when you're standing anywhere near it. They had it running double shifts in the first week. The foundation footprint was massive, 600 feet long, 180 feet wide, with loading pit excavations on the south end going down 22 feet for the truck receiving tunnels. The cat was pulling about 800 cubic yards a day out of the hole. Beautiful machine. Wrong hole. I watched from my field. I noted the date. I went back to planting. The first sign came in August. They were still in the foundation phase. Concrete piers going in. The big slip-form elevator leg footings getting formed up. One of the pier holes on the northeast corner started taking on water at 17 feet. They brought in pumps. Wrote it up as normal dewatering. Iowa summer. Water tables up. Standard procedure. By September, 2 more pier locations were weeping. The dewatering costs had tripled the original estimate on that line item alone. The contractor brought in a second pump set. Trailer-mounted Godwin CD150M units, 6-inch discharge, running day and night. The sound of those pumps ran across my field every morning when I was in the cab doing corn harvest. 400 acres of corn, running my combine. That year I had a John Deere S790, 473 horsepower, 35-foot draper head, moving about 5.2 miles per hour through 220 bushel corn. A good sound, a busy, productive sound. Different from the sound of pumps fighting a water table that isn't supposed to be there. November, they poured the main foundation slab sections. The weather had turned cold, which temporarily lowered the water table and let them get the concrete in. The project manager sent a note to the neighboring properties about anticipated truck traffic. I got one. I read it. I filed it. They resumed construction in March 2022. That's when the wet cycle came back. It wasn't even a bad spring by Iowa standards. We ended up around 4.8 inches of rain in April, which is slightly above normal but nothing dramatic. But it was enough. The old slough woke up. My tile outlets ran heavy for 3 weeks, and on the Gruber tract, on the northeast corner of that big foundation, the ground started moving. Not dramatically, not all at once. Just a 1/4 inch here, an 1/8 inch there. Survey stakes that had been set at grade in November were sitting low by Easter. The construction crew's laser-level crew caught it first. They're thorough people. That part wasn't the problem, and they flagged it for the structural engineer. The structural engineer ordered new borings. This time they went to 30 feet. At 22 feet, in 4 locations clustered around the northeast corner, they hit what the boring log described as highly saturated organic clay with peat inclusions. An old, wet, buried layer. Something that had been a wetland before anyone put a plow to it. Something I had described, standing at a fence line 14 months earlier, to a man with an orange flagging gun and a 200-foot grid. The remediation plan they ultimately approved cost $4. $1 million and added 7 months to the schedule. They had to go back in with a Caterpillar D6 dozer and excavate the northeast third of the completed foundation. Haul out the soft material. Bring in engineered structural fill, 4,000 tons of it delivered in end-dump semis, $12 a ton plus haul. Recompact in lifts, re-drill the piers, re-pour. I watched those dump trucks from across the fence line for 3 weeks straight. 20 loads a day, each truck carrying roughly 22 tons. 440 tons a day of engineered fill. Just trying to make that corner do something the ground had been telling everyone for a century it didn't want to do. You know what all that costs? Not just in dollars, but in equipment hours, in diesel, in poor days lost to cold weather because they pushed into November when they should have been done in April. The $4.1 million they acknowledged publicly was just the direct remediation contract. It doesn't count the delay penalties the construction loan carried during 7 extra months, or 14 months of dewatering pumps running day and night. I didn't say anything about it to anyone. That's not my style. I had said what I knew when I knew it, and that was between me and whoever needed to hear it. Some people never hear the things they need to hear until the equipment is already in the hole. In the fall of 2022, a younger guy from their site team, not Marcus, a different one, name was Tyler, came by to talk about a drainage easement on my property. They wanted to run a new tile outlet through my south field to help manage the water table on their site. We sat at my kitchen table for about an hour. He was straightforward. Smart kid, civil engineer, maybe 3 years out of Iowa State. At some point, he said, almost like he was thinking out loud, someone must have known about this. The subsurface conditions, somebody local. I let that sit for a second. Then I said, somebody did. He looked at me. I said, go pull your pre-construction meeting notes from April 2021. There's a neighbor listed. That's me. He stared at the table a long moment. Then, I'm sorry. I don't know if anyone passed that along to the right people. I nodded. The ground doesn't care about apologies. The water moves where the water moves. All you can do is know your land well enough to work with it. And be humble enough to listen when the man next door who's farmed it for 31 years shows up at your fence with something worth saying. We worked out the drainage easement. It's a fair arrangement. The new tile system they put in actually improved flow on my south field too. Cleaned up that ghost slough better than I could have done alone. But I'll tell you something. Every time I pull a field pass along that south fence line in my 9RX, 640 horses, 4 tracks, moving through Iowa soil the way that machine was born to do, I look over at that elevator complex. Big structure. Impressive when the sun hits it right. They got it done. Good for them. And I think about that morning in April 2021. The orange flagging, the white F-250 with the Illinois plate. The 20 minutes Christine Fales gave me before her phone rang. The ground knew. It had been trying to tell someone since before I was born. I just happened to be the one listening. That's the whole job. Machines don't make you a farmer. Horsepower doesn't make you a farmer. Knowing your ground, knowing what it remembers, what it hides, where it wants to go when you're not looking, that's what makes you a farmer. Everything else is just iron and diesel. If this one hit something in you, subscribe. Leave a comment. Tell me where you're farming from, or where you grew up watching someone do it right. I read everyone. I'll see you in the field.